Thank you so, thank you so very, very much for taking the time to be with us. And I do take very seriously that you're giving us your time. And I see my job as making this entertaining, informative, and above all, inspiring. I am Jackie Hildering. I will go into more detail about who I am. I'm the storyteller tonight. Chloe and I are both coming to you from Kwakwaka'wakw territory on northern Vancouver Island, and Chloe is the technical support tonight. So I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes, and Chloe can give some instruction, and in case you have any questions that we can deal with the technical things just now.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jackie. So welcome, everybody. My name is Chloe. I'm the Research and Education Assistant for MERS. So I'm here for technical support tonight. So that's it for technical things. I'll pass it on back to you, Jackie.
Okay, here we go, folks. Jackie Hildering. Who am I? I'm wearing two hats tonight. I am part of the small but intrepid, or as we get called, thank you, Ali, small but mighty organization, the Marine Education and Research Society. That's that hat. And I am also a woman who dresses in a green tutu and throws herself in the ocean and calls myself the Marine Detective. It means the world, truly, that you would spend time with me. What do I have to offer, possibly, to fulfill your time tonight, where at the end you will hopefully feel inspired? The life that I have chosen, and to some degree I feel has chosen me through a lot of happenstance, has led me to know one small part of the planet really, really well. I could never have foreseen what would have happened. I have often said that if anybody had ever told me that I would be a diver, an underwater photographer, and a whale researcher, it truly would have been the equivalent of telling me that I would have been an astronaut. It was entirely not on my radar. What was consistent right from the start is I am a teacher. I am loud, I am bossy, I have an inner 8-year-old who is very, very strong, who wants to teach people about the things that I get to learn. But yes, I know individual whales, so does Chloe. And it's gone to the extent where not only can we and do we strive to cataloging them by their tails and by their dorsal fins, but also for some of them by the insides of their mouths. And we will get to that. That's where this has led to. Could never have foreseen that. But not only do I have the extraordinary privilege of knowing individual humpbacks coming back from Hawaii and from Mexico, and to know them over a 20-year time span, but I also know individual fish. And here's an example of that. This tiger rockfish has been in the same spot for the last 6 years. How do I know it's the same tiger rockfish? Because of her stripes. Apparently I can't stop myself, and it's not enough to try to tell individual whales apart. Now I'm trying to tell individual rockfish apart. But truly, the knowing that fish have homes and being able to discern them as individuals, and how that might somehow fit into learning from this tiny piece of the planet, means an incredible amount. And studying them as individuals, as well as with the humpbacks, this is something that will get passed on to next generations. Most of the humpbacks will likely outlive me. The tiger rockfish hopefully also will outlive me, because they can live to be up to 116 years old. And I think that as well, understanding that there are some fish species who have exact homes, that we understand the longevity of some of these species, that might change our attitudes, and to have the appropriate respect and understanding of how things fit together. And how do I know she's a she? Because she's pregnant here in this bottom photo. The rockfish actually have internal fertilization, and then the young depart from their mothers fully developed. So we want to know a little bit about where you are, so that this feels a little bit more intimate. A special welcome to all our humpback whale sponsors. Thank you very much. The sponsors of Moonstar and Twister and Nick and Argonaut and Casey and Slashed. And for some of you, you sponsor multiple ones of them. But thank you to all of you that you would give us the messaging that this kind of content we'll be delivering is worthwhile. But we have 2 poll questions. So a question will pop up on your screen. There's 2 questions there. And if nobody can see the results, but we want to have a sense that we'll post then of where people are calling in from, and also if you perceive yourself to be near the ocean.
Yeah, so the poll just popped up. It should just appear on your screen. It might not work for you if you are using just a web browser, but it's all good. It's not a test. It's just for interest, and we'll leave that up for a few more seconds. If you can and want to participate, please let us know where you are. Otherwise, that's all good. We'll give you another 10 seconds or so.
This morning we had somebody, I believe, from Bangladesh in the 3,500 people plus that were on the school presentation. I haven't gone through the effort of looking up the time zone they would have been in at the time. Okay, the poll results. Not a big surprise that we have a whole bunch of Vancouver Islanders, but thankfully others from British Columbia, others throughout Canada, somebody from the United States, welcome very, very much. International, we'd love it if you put into the chat where you're calling in from. And then a lot of you perceive yourselves to be close to the ocean. Are you near the water? I should not have written this. Yeah, are you near the ocean? Chloe, that was you. Look, are you near the ocean? At any rate, folks, yeah, we all actually are close to the ocean, no matter where we are, because of course this is the blue planet. And whether it is the ocean in the form of snow and mountains or coming out of the tap, it's the same water going around and around and around. So jumping in then on that point, the ocean, I I would think that the audience that I have tonight, I don't think I'm going to provide you with new information. I am not going to dig heavily into science. I'm, of course, very, very willing to answer any kind of questions at the end, but I see this more as people who likely care as much as I do about learning from the ocean. And I've very strongly put this forward as it being about inspiration, that maybe you too sometimes feel a sense of overwhelm in what is happening in the environment generally, on top of what is happening in society, as if those two things are separate. And again, that's what I hope to share is my experiences and the lessons I feel I've learned as an in the trenches educator, who then again has this privilege of learning from a small piece of our coast. And that you likely don't need to hear just how important the ocean is. You certainly, I think, by way of your proximity to the ocean. It might even translate into your art, into your healing, into your inspiration. There is something about the ocean that goes beyond science. But of course, it is also where at least 50% of the world's oxygen is being produced through the tiny plant-like plankton up to the giant kelps. And there are so many people who are unaware of this, who thankfully are aware of the importance of forests, terrestrial forests, but not understanding that the ocean produces this incredible amount of oxygen and thereby also is taking in all this carbon dioxide, which is so important in a time of climate change. 97% of the water at any time is saline, is in ocean, and is going through cycling into fresh water. This is the food. It is a massive regulator of climate when you consider the sheer mass that the one ocean has, and of course, energy and transportation as well. So it truly is Mother Ocean where life on Earth began, and it is the life-sustaining force on the planet, yeah, no matter how far away you are from her shores. This presentation, I've already framed it a little bit. It feels a bit vulnerable to me. It's easy to talk about humpbacks. It's easy to talk about nudibranchs. It's less easy to make this about me, but it is my doing that this is what I thought. I've been asked to do it previously, is how did you get there? How did you learn what you did? And again, this is ultimately all about inspiration, but I am putting myself out there more than I normally would within a presentation. So this is me. I'm a British Columbia girl. And that look on my face staring at a dandelion, I don't think that's changed very much. There is, for some reason, an incredible awe in the natural world that I drank in, I think, from the time that I was lucky enough to grow up on the ocean. I was to become a veterinarian. Therefore, I went to the Netherlands. Then there was a man. How many times do the stories go that way? I ended up being a biology teacher. Initially in this lovely little castle where we still had ducks and big fish that would come up and try to get the ducks. There was still nature around us. But then for career, I ended up in a big city in Rotterdam, where it was very difficult to even find a patch of grass to do any kind of field studies with the students. I did always, for me, it's always been about kids. And I'm going to dare share with you that I think that something is really relevant is that I do not have children of my own. And somehow that too, I think has led to my having a sense of wonder about children and the connection to them and my sense of being in service to them. But yes, always environmental groups. The Earthlings was a gang that I had in Rotterdam, and that is now the name of my company, actually, as a legacy to that gang of students. But what happened back in 1998 is while visiting British Columbia, at that time I was the deputy head of the International School of Rotterdam, and some friends decided that I should go whale watching on northern Vancouver Island. I don't think I knew there were orca in British Columbia, to be honest. I certainly had never studied whales. But what happened is that on that trip out of Telegraph Cove, I went quiet, and that doesn't happen very often. It felt like I had been slapped upside the head on a trip that, with this incredible experience I've had since that time, I probably would rank now as a 1 out of 10. We sat on the edge of the ecological reserve. We heard the orca calling. We could hear the stones rubbing over one another. And I felt absolutely like I was filling up with something that I had been bleeding out. And I knew that I needed to be learning from nature rather than talking about it as if it were somewhere else in this urbanized setting. Because I felt I also wasn't being a good teacher if I was speaking about nature as if it were something theoretical. So I jumped. I left the position. I came back to British Columbia and I started working on the very same whale watching boats that I had gone out on. Thank you so incredibly much. Yes, I'm so glad that didn't happen with all the students. Thank you for your patience. So here we go. I was telling you the moving story of how I've gone from windmills to whales. Yeah, how it was that one trip was like a slap upside the head. Yeah, and that I wanted to learn from nature. So I left my job in the Netherlands. I came back to BC. This is me in 1999, pointing at things and going, look, a whale. We used to make all these mistakes, yet trying to make these experiences count on the whale watching boats with these incredibly powerful engagers, the orca, that are such good indicators of environmental health and good barometers for our human value systems. Yeah, having made terrible mistakes of thinking that they were all the same and that there were many of them, and the craziness that we weren't studying animals as individuals before the early 1970s, and thereby the presumption that there were frequent sightings meant that they were many. I did this for a really long time, thankfully often with children. I hired some wonderful, wonderful biologists who are now my bosses in the Marine Education and Research Society. But I got this incredible chance to learn. I got an incredible chance to learn, but only at the surface. I learned to look at whales as individuals. And it really, I would imagine that you have the same sort of experiences if you're on this call, whether it's birds in your backyard or an anemone in a certain place in the beach, that when you start focusing on individuals, you start being able to speak for a small part of the planet and to see the interactions in a way that you can't otherwise. I began to understand where at the beginning it was just whale, 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 where it became clear to me how they were interacting. And it became clear to me how it was the same families of orca, generation upon generation, that were going after specific runs of salmon. Yeah, generation upon generation upon generation, about how it was the job of the salmon to be taking the nutrients from the ocean into the very rivers they were born. And the puzzle, the intricacy, the web started revealing itself to me. The experiences had through all the years allowed me to see change as well. I'm still only talking about what I saw at the surface, but it used to be that every time we saw a mammal eating orca, it was try to get the picture. We hardly ever see them. They dive so much longer. They always have to be quiet. But then what started happening is we started seeing them much more frequently and in larger groups. And oh, what a surprise that when you stop killing their prey, the seals and sea lions, because that's who we used to be, the reward is they don't have to be as stealthy. They still, of course, need to be a different kind of orca, because the culture that works to go after marine mammals does not work to go after the likes of salmon. But there have been these changes over time as well. And some of them have actually been really positive because we used to be societies that would chop basking sharks in half because they were an inconvenience, shooting seals and sea lions, whaling up to 1967 in British Columbia, and that we used to shoot the orca, presuming they were bloodthirsty, abundant pests. But I also was doing a lot with kids. Here's a wonderful beach walk I'll never forget where I had a group of children, in a hailstorm. Really easy to keep them engaged during that. But initially, I was learning from the marine life at the surface. And moon snails, I often reference as the gateway mollusk for me. I used to wear a shell around my neck. It just blew my mind. And all of this, I did not have the background in marine biology at all. I had the eyes of a biologist and the curiosity of a child, I think, where I could put my thinking about adaptations and then also as an educator trying to fit together to go like, oh my God, what are these holes in these shells? And then finding out it was the moon snail that would drill holes into them with the radulets, rough tongue, and then suck out like, whoa, that is so cool. And then thinking when I found the shells, well, wait a minute, how does this huge animal get into this small shell and doesn't it leave it completely exposed if it can fit in there? And it can because it drains out water. But this is an evolutionary flaw. This is not possible. There must be a way that it seals off the shell. And sure enough, I find out there's something called the operculum that closes it off. And then it's like, wait a minute, is that why hermit crabs, that many of them have one claw bigger than the other because they don't have the trap door? So that means that they have to pull the one claw over and shut it. Why, yes, that's what it means. And then to find out, whoa, what are those? So I'm really making clear this is literal immersion for me in the marine life of British Columbia, from the orca to the moon snails to the sea slugs. But indeed, find what? These are the egg collars. The females put the eggs, lay the eggs with mucus and sandwiched in sand, and it takes them 10 to 14 hours, and they push them up to the surface. And yet the average British Columbian thinks they're garbage. Those of you who follow me on social media know that, of course, what I do is turn it into a public service announcement and have all these things going out into the world going, no, this is not garbage. And how on earth is it that many of us get to be my age, are British Columbians, coastal British Columbians, and we do not know what these are? Something is wrong. Something is wrong. What really, really became clear to me, and I began that way myself, where it was the life at the surface. The life at the surface and a bias to thinking that the ocean was better somewhere else. As a humpback researcher, this has really become clear to me. The number of times that people ask me, British Columbians ask me, why are the humpbacks here? Like, why are you asking that? This is revealing your bias to thinking they belong in Hawaii and Mexico. You must think things are better in Hawaii and Mexico. But if you understood why our waters are dark, you would be questioning why the giants would ever leave. Because our ocean is thick with plankton. Hawaii and Mexico, clear water like that, yes, it's easier for we humans to see the life, but there isn't the planktonic soup to sustain the same amount of life, and certainly not to sustain giants. And this is a quote I use often, but how on earth can we be the voters, the consumers, the parents that we need to be if we have a bias away to other places, confounded by the idea that there's a divide between land and sea? So for me, it really became about trying to speak for what was below the surface, not to perpetuate the idea that the orca, that the big halibut dragged to the surface, that the world's biggest sea lions, that they somehow existed in isolation, but to really start talking about ecosystems and connection. And yeah, I became a diver. And dear folks, it was not easy. This is my face in the first year I went diving. The ocean literally punched me in the face. This is what happens if you don't exhale appropriately and equalize in your mask. And there's a long story around how this happened, but this pretty look is called mask squeeze. I did not equalize, and boom, every blood vessel in my eyes was burst. It was not easy to be a diver. It has not become much easier to become a diver. But oh, the learning. The first time I ever did a boat dive and had to step off a boat and started then, because the deeper you go, more ocean is pushing down on you. So you are going to be propelled downward, trying to do all the things. But this stream of consciousness, like, oh my God, that's a sea star. Wait, what is that? Wait, what is that? And I was hooked forever, or for what I hope is forever. I never wanted to take pictures underwater. I was already taking pictures above the surface. It was, of course, in the time of film, so it was expensive. It was often disappointing. The main reason I was doing it was to try to figure out who the whales were, but there was like a 2-week lag time before I got the pictures back. That wasn't super useful. But then somebody gave me an underwater camera, and I was teaching at that time, and I found the power of being able to say to students, yeah, that fish lives over there. And for them to look and go, there? It's like, yeah, he's one of your neighbors. And the two photos I'm showing here are the ones that really changed things, where I realized the power of bringing the life right below the surface to people. Like kelp, people know what bull kelp is, but somehow seeing it from this perspective does something to people. It offers a different way of looking at something that many people already know. And then many of you know this image. It was a huge awakening for me. This is and I don't think it's important to know the species name. It's an alabaster nudibranch at only 3 meters depth at the Port Hardy boat ramp. And you can see the sun coming through right there. But the power of this image was that people would look at me and say, you took this picture here? That's here? And I learned the power of that's here. It's like, yeah, that's here. It's right at 3 meters depth. It's in this ocean. There's such mystery and fragility right there. And that I hoped somehow that would translate into people caring more, having more understanding of what we don't know about the life even right below the surface, and how essential that is for the sake of the whales and everything else within the ecosystem. So yeah, it's gotten pretty bad, this underwater photography thing. So these are images just from the last 2 months. And to be able to bring those to the surface and to be able to say, this is here, this is what this life is, to speak of it as neighbors has become, frankly, a bigger driving force than has the whale research, because I think it is possibly even better what I have to offer. And it is extraordinary. Like in my immersion in learning from things, I would come up and have seen something remarkable and ask my fellow divers, like, what was that? It's like a big mass of noodles and there's little dots in it. What is it? And I would get, we don't know. It's like, well, why don't you know? Yeah, it's so cool. And then my thinking as a biologist would kick in to try to sort it out. But it surprises me still how little we know about life just below the surface. And this is a very recent example. So this is a species of stock jelly that is only about maximum 3 centimeters wide. And it's right in Port McNeill and in the shallows. And it happened to be as I was coming up, like, wow, what's that? And then only to find out this is a species that has yet to get a name to be described by science. And then looking at it with just how incredibly cool its adaptations are is like, wow, cool pom poms. Yeah, so that must pick up big surface area, that must pick up plankton, yeah, in this thick ocean. And then the mouth must be in the middle whereby it can feed itself. And this is one of these examples. This is my friend Natasha pointing then at a great winged sea slug. And I'll never forget the first time I saw one of these swimming underwater. In the beginning, it's like all new. I was like, what the heck is that? It looks like an underwater butterfly. And watched it flap around. And then, of course, you just stop moving. And in the ocean, you'll just sink to the bottom carefully. You don't have to put energy into that. But I was so astounded. There used to be something called the Sea Slug Forum, which which many of you probably would have liked to be on, where we would share knowledge. And I sent this like, look at this thing, like it's the great winged sea slug. Does anybody know what it eats? I managed to photograph when in this hole opened up. And what I got back in that time was nobody knows for sure what it eats. Probably plankton. But this is an example where it is a sea slug and not a nudibranch. It actually still has an internal shell and doesn't have the naked gills of nudibranchs. But there's just one awakening after the other, and the sea slugs alone, like my goodness, this, I think you realize the average British Columbian, let alone Canadian, would associate these with warm waters. These are ambassadors that can shatter the idea that there isn't color within these waters. And then you start thinking of their incredible adaptations, yeah, that each of them has very specific prey, and that the way that nature has made sure that the life of a sea slug is pretty narrow so that it has a greater chance as a slug to find its prey and to find a mate is to have specific prey. And then most often they even lay their eggs right on top of their prey. And that you see, like, this is one of these examples of where I came up going, what was that? It looked like somebody crocheted something. And one of my first the marine detective like things was like, okay, I know these are egg masses. I think they're from sea slugs. I'm going to figure out which species laid which eggs. And not that I'm the only one that has done that, but it became something I found incredibly engaging. And then if you look at each of these, where you see the little dots, there are multiple eggs developing in each of those eggs, which I think would make complete sense to you, that if you're hatching your babies out into the ocean, you better lay a whole lot of eggs because you're going to be feeding a whole lot of things. And this is also then what makes sense that sea slugs are hermaphrodites, or that slugs are hermaphrodites. You're a slug. And even though you've got a narrow world of one prey item, so you have a greater chance of smelling out one of your kind, it makes sense that you both become inseminated and you both lay eggs. And that kind of wonder about the adaptations and the niches that these species fulfill absolutely astounds me. And I have found that it really is this limited thinking about our ocean and a bias away towards the warm, because warm is more comfortable for we humans, because we profile the likes of Mexico and Hawaii as holiday destinations, but also because it's easy to see the life. It's easy to film the life. So most often we are bombarded by imagery as well that comes from warmer waters. And there is this lack of understanding of what plankton is, what this soup of life is. You can see here how the ocean looks green. And I know you probably realize this, but the ocean is full of microscopic like plant life, the phytoplankton. They are the oxygen producers. They are the bottom of the food web. They are buffering carbon dioxide. And then, of course, the giant kelps are doing the same. And I think, though, with the plants like, sorry, the animal like plankton, people get, okay, krill, I understand that's animal-like plankton, zooplankton, uh, because it looks like something I can recognize. It looks like something I can recognize. Sorry, folks, I hadn't realized my video wasn't on, so you can't see me waving my hands, which is a huge deficit. Yeah. that krill people have a grip on, like, okay, I get it. Yeah, plankton means to drift. So the krill, as they're moving their legs this way, that's not them trying to counteract our strong currents. That is them feeding on even smaller plankton. But I find that there is a lack of understanding of what's happening at a microscopic level. Not that all plankton has to be small, because the huge jellies are also the drifters. But here's an example. So this is magnified thousands of times. It is an example of larva that is in the ocean, a baby, and it is not moving its cilia so that it can then propel itself through the ocean. It's feeding on something even smaller. But the ocean is thick with babies of all different species. This one grows bigger and bigger and bigger. It settles to the bottom of the ocean. It grows a shell, and it becomes this. So the ocean is absolutely thick with baby sea slugs, baby sea cucumbers, baby sea stars, yeah, larval fish, and on it goes. Here's another example. Yeah, this is magnified thousands of times. It grows bigger and bigger and bigger, settles to the bottom of the ocean, attaches to a rock with its head, builds a shell as well, and then spends its life kicking food into its mouth with its foot. And I'm sure that some of you have got that this is a barnacle, and it is the world's biggest barnacle species, the giant acorn barnacle, because our ocean is full of giants because of the amount of plankton at the bottom of the food web. So you can see how thick the ocean is, yeah, with baby species of many, many kinds, with the phytoplankton, the plant-like plankton, but also it's an ocean full of sex cells at times. Yeah, and this too, unto itself, is just extraordinary to think of the likes of sea cucumbers and sea stars needing to mate, anemones needing to mate, and some of them even between species of anemones, there are very different mating strategies, but a lot of them are broadcast spawners, where then there is some cue for some worm species, it is a full moon, and up come all the worms of this nearest species, and they rupture at the surface. So there's a greater chance of the sex cells meeting, egg meeting sperm. With the likes of sea stars, whether it's cumulative temperature or just that it reaches a certain temperature, but suddenly, yeah, you can imagine the amounts of sex cells that need to be released for a chance of fertilization to happen. But through evolution or creation, whatever it is, that this would be cued like it is, that for some species it's cued on slack tide at a certain temperature. Okay, everybody, now release the gametes, yeah, for the survival of our kind. So it is indeed the sea of love. And this is simplistic, but of course it's like this. Yeah, what is our ocean? Why is it dark? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of the tiny life that then fuels a food web whereby you can have the giants at the top. And why is there more plankton? There's more oxygen dissolved in cold water. And we also have an awful lot of current on our coasts resulting from the tidal exchanges, but also because of narrow passes, the bathymetry of the bottom of the ocean. So you get collisions and crashes and pushing so that you get the mixing of all the nutrients. So while trying to educate about sea slugs, the life below the surface, yeah, still working on the whale watching boats, yeah, to make the experience of seeing orca count to counteract the noise footprint we were making and the burning of the fossil fuels, yeah, trying to get people to understand how different we can be once knowledge replaces fear. Look how wrong we were about orca. Then something you just can't ignore happened, and that was the coming back of humpbacks. This was so exceptional to be able to witness this. Yeah, we hardly ever used to see humpbacks. And Casey's one of the first calves I ever knew, which is why I keep on using him as an example within these presentations. but it just wasn't acceptable not to know who these whales were. It just isn't possible that I could have just gone, oh, look, it's a humpback. That is not acceptable. Who is the humpback? Will they come back? How old are they? What is age of first calving? What is their social organization? What are they feeding on? Yes, I understand that if we stop killing them, as we killed them up to 1967, that we have a thankful second chance. But this seems like there's something else going on. It's not just population growth, they're shifting from somewhere else. What are they showing us about prey and or climate? And so, together with equally curious human beings, we started the Marine Education and Research Society. And then getting to know the whales as individuals, it means that I know Casey's age, we know that he's male, we know that he goes to Hawaii, we know that he has been hit by a boat at least once, and that he's been entangled at least twice. And this is then just for our core study area around northeastern Vancouver Island, because we could not have seen what was coming. It was fueled by curiosity and also, I think, a sense of responsibility that this was happening on our watch. We needed to make this experience, this knowledge count with such, again, powerful, and it sounds like a clinical way of saying this, but such incredibly powerful engagers. We would have been doing such a disservice to people, let alone to the environment, to say it's a whale, it's a humpback. But we could not have seen, and this is the only graph in the presentation, that this was going to happen. And this is specifically for the area, our core study area around Telegraph Cove. What's happened since is that our study area has expanded very significantly, but we don't have the same sort of effort going on there. Yeah, it's so we can't have the same sort of comparison over time. And we also are the coordinators of bringing together all those cataloging humpbacks in British Columbia to have one catalog again, because Fisheries and Oceans Canada stopped doing that in 2010. So what this is showing you is, whoa, yeah, there weren't many humpbacks back in 2003 when, that's certainly when I started getting serious about this. This wasn't 7 at the same time. This was 7 in the entire year. And you can see where it's gone to. Yeah, if we take 2019, for example, 95 humpbacks. And then really important in looking at this is that of those 95, 81 of them were whales that we had documented in the same area in previous years. And I believe that this is one of the most valuable things I have to share about humpbacks is, as an educator, it has struck me that people seem to think that the humpbacks are kind of blundering around. They're either in transit because they belong somewhere else, Hawaii, Mexico, or Alaska, or that they are in transit, or that they are not the neighbors that they are. So what this shows is incredible site fidelity. Yes, some humpbacks have second, third, fourth favorite places that they go to. They can have second, third, fourth, even feeding strategies. But generally, humpbacks are like fishermen and fisherwomen that come back from the breeding grounds where they go to where there's little to no food for them. They leave because there's less risk of mammal-eating orca being around when they have their babies. Same with the gray whales. The mums will lose up to half their body mass, and then back they come, as hungry as they are, to then feed in our rich waters or up further to the north. And the same whales are coming back to the same spots on the coast. So they're not in transit most often. Yeah, they are moving in big circles looking for food. And this has led then to really raw knowledge about who these whales are. So here's a very recent example of a whale that ended up dead on the beach in Haida Gwaii. I know that many of you follow us on social media, so you would have seen these posts. But initially, this was just a dead whale. In fact, it happened to be that a friend who lived nearby thought maybe I should take a picture of the tail, because the government officials, that wasn't part of the standard procedure, where truly it should be. Whenever you can figure out who an animal is, that allows you to know things like, did they possibly die of old age? Yeah, could pregnancy have been an issue? All these different questions. but also so difficult to quantify is how important it is where it's not just a dead whale on the beach, but where we can say that's kayak. She was around 18 years old. We know she had one calf, possibly a second. And I think that does make a difference where it doesn't have the same sort of anonymity and disconnect anymore. It becomes a whale who had calves. It becomes a whale who had traveled around large parts of British Columbia, who was known to Hawaii, for example. And she is kayak because if you look here, there's a white symbol on her tail. My colleague could identify her even with the sand covering that white marking, but what looked like a kayak to us. We give them nicknames for distinctive features that helps us remember who they are because names like in Kayak's case, BCX0977 are not particularly engaging. And this helps us in knowing who they are, but also I think does so much more in helping people connect to the whales as individuals and not to think of them as blundering around the coast all the same. And as part of our journey then as the Marine Education and Research Society, I could not have anticipated the necessity for boater education. I would have thought that once there were better marine mammal regulations, that those would have ended up in boater courses. I would have anticipated that when you have the return of giants off our coast, that not only out of concern for them, but out of boater safety, that something would have been done to educate people. And we do have government funding for some of this work, but we are perpetually trying to close this gap. So one of the things I have come to realize too is often when doing presentations specifically on humpbacks for boaters, I'll talk about the risk of entanglement, I'll talk about the risk of collision, and it seems to me like the magnitude of it isn't quite settling in. And I believe what I was missing was that people don't realize that dead whales usually sink. So there's the thinking that, well, if this is really a problem, surely there would be bodies everywhere, which is people also forgetting, not realizing how vast our coastline is. And that you may not, even if a whale does stay at the surface, that doesn't get pushed down by the water pressure to the bottom of the ocean, that you may not even be able to know what it died from because of the state of decay, for example. And what also is something that sometimes gets used by those who have had collisions with the whales as well. Nobody wants to hit a whale. And it is such a sudden return. And of course, we have traffic on our waters, too many boats that are not realizing, too many vessel operators that are not realizing that a whale could suddenly surface. But it is almost an inevitability that there are going to be some accidents. But then the messaging sometimes is, well, there was no blood and we didn't see a dead body. Well, blunt force trauma, you don't have to see blood. In the case of Hawkeye here, a rarity where you actually have the body of a whale, Hawkeye died from having been hit by something very large. And the evidence is inside the body from the blunt force trauma with no evidence on the outside. With entanglement, there too, something I've learned, like we had 4 humpbacks that we knew were entangled on our coast last year. And thankfully, people are really, really concerned about that. I think, but those are just the 4 that we know about. You do realize there's more. There's a whole ocean outside of Vancouver Island and Haida Gwaii where there isn't going to even be the human detection, let alone people knowing what they should or shouldn't be doing with regards to entanglement. So we're trying to help close the gap as well, not only in human education, but this is something that has to be stopped at the source. So part of the research we've done to compel how serious a risk this is, you can't find the dead whales most often, but you can look for scarring to see if they are survivors of entanglement. And for the whales where we've been able to take a photo of this tail stalk at the right angle, so that makes sense that whether it's netting or a rope is going to end up near the tail. And we've seen that around 50% of them have scarring from entanglement. So that starts informing the need for, like, no fisherman or woman wants to lose their gear to a humpback going through it, let alone that we want humpbacks to be dying from entanglement. And often too, there is such romanticism around the idea of what to do with regards to entanglement, which is really problematic because people will think, oh, fed by what's on social media, the whale will know I'm trying to do something good. I will cut the line, it will jump thanking me. Yeah, that's a reality I've never lived. And if you cut the line at the surface, you actually could be making things so much worse because now you can't recognize the whale's entangled and you don't have something to attach buoys to slow down the whale so that you can get to it and make the right decisions about how to proceed by not getting in the water, but by using drones and stick cameras. And whatever the whale's dragging behind it too, because the problem is usually not immediate for entangled whales. It is the long-term effects of infection, not being able to move properly, not being able to feed properly, that the biggest problem on our coast is finding them back. So if you can get a tracking tag, a VHF tag on whatever the whale's dragging behind it, then you can get the expertise to the whale. But if somebody cuts the line at the surface or the net and there's nothing dragging behind the whale, then you have nothing to attach the tag to. At any rate, this has taken up so much of our time and it isn't, and it's necessary. And we're trying more and more and more to find constructive approaches to this, like, okay, we'll develop the boater course where the basics are there with regards to the regulations, to how to avoid collision and what to do and what not to do in case of entanglement, because this is very serious risk to human safety as well, where so many British Columbians are not aware that we have this return of giants, yeah, more gray whales as well, humpback whales, fin whales on some part of our coast, and that they really are an unpredictable whale. And the worst case so far is that somebody is a paraplegic. It wasn't driving the boat. It was a guided fishing vessel near Haida Gwaii and in an area known to have a lot of humpbacks, and suddenly a whale surfaced in front of the boat. So yeah, the things learned, also a lot about human psychology. Back to happy stuff. So the humpbacks, we've got a second chance with them. And they really are this remarkable, huge whale, as big as a school bus. They are hungry when they come back. They're highly acrobatic. And some of you have seen this video before. If I had $1 for every time I've played this video, yeah, we could fund an awful lot of our work. But I want to play it to you here because it shows you how it all comes together in this ecosystem. An ocean green with phytoplankton. Yeah, all the microscopic life in it too. The herring, yeah, this incredibly generous, important fish on our coast. Yeah, being gone after by the diving birds, by the common murres, by the gulls trying to propel themselves down to grab one. And then nobody on Earth knows how the humpbacks find their food because they do not have biosonar like toothed whales, like orca, but then in they come. And this is the lifeblood of our coast. And of all places that the BBC could get video worthy of David Attenborough narrating it, this is right outside Telegraph Cove.
The attack from beneath, trapping the fish against the surface. But they push the herring within range of the gulls. It's a feeding frenzy. The table is set for the mightiest predator of them all. The humpbacks have reached their feeding grounds.
I just love seeing your reaction. Isn't it just an absolutely fantastic thing how it all fits together? Yay for a second chance with giants who are unpredictable, hungry, as big as a school bus, and highly acrobatic. And then again, like this is my immersion. This is the things I could never have anticipated. And and again, so grateful for the opportunity to share this with you and what I may have come to understand through all of this. I will never forget the first time I saw this happen. And what this is Conger, the humpback, who I knew for a long time, hanging at the surface with his mouth open. What you're looking at here is you're looking right up into his palate with the baleen draped down. Like, what on earth is going on here? And my much younger colleagues, I like telling this story, when I came back and said, I saw Conger, he was at the surface, he had his mouth open like this, he was spinning around a little bit and kind of pushing with his pectoral fins. And I got the sense they didn't believe me. And then suddenly there was the giant discovery when I was out on the boat with them, like, look what the whale is doing. He's like, yes, I know, it's special. At any rate, yeah, in studying animals as individuals, as putting in this time to learn from the small part of the planet that you're in, we knew who the whale was. We knew who other whales were. And we could say, we have never seen this whale do this before. And what this is, we've come to call it trap feeding. And where most of the humpbacks in our area lunge feed, like we just heard narrated by Sir David Attenborough, some of them under specific conditions have learned to do this. We call it trap feeding because it's like a Venus flytrap. Hang there, low energy with your mouth open. There's got to be birds involved because there's got to be something for that's also juvenile herring for them to escape from. They'll hide in your mouth and then you can just close your mouth and that's that. And that is why we now catalog the inside of the humpback's mouths as well. Because when they're doing this, you don't get to see their dorsal fin. That was already special that we did that. And you certainly very rarely get to see the tail. But in 2011, we caught two of them doing it, Moonstar and Conger. And as of last year, there's at least 27. So they don't do it all the time. They do it under these very specific conditions. And here's a summary of that then. So if you've got a dense ball like this, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. You just got to take a huge mouthful, push out the salt water because you can't process salt water. You're a mammal. It all cascades down your narrow throat. Done. That justifies lunge feeding. But if there aren't as many fish, but there still are birds going after it, hang there with your mouth open, push with your pectoral fins, set a trap. And here's an example then when my dear friend Tavish Campbell got this video, we didn't even know that these two humpbacks could trap feed. You'll see Freckles on the left, Frosty on the right, and hopefully you can see how they're pushing with their pectoral fins. You can see the birds going after the fish, and you get a sense then of how this all comes together. Freckles is setting the trap. And pushing with her pectoral fins. At any rate, to summarize, folks, yeah, the lessons learned, yeah, through all of this, from what I never could have anticipated, is truly the sense of connection. Same orca, generation after generation, going after the same runs of salmon, yeah, and with all the complications of the human attitudes that we've forced upon them, that the same rockfish are living in the same place, but also like the way that things fit together, even at the level of where whales poo. So here's Inukshuk. Inukshuk probably, I don't know how he'd feel about me showing a picture of him pooing, but this is what his tail looks like. So if you know what an Inukshuk is, the piling of the rocks, there you go. And it is pretty clear that Inukshuk has been feeding on krill because krill is quite red, and that's what you can see from the poo. And you can imagine how many calls we get from people going, the whale is bleeding, save it. Yeah, no, that's poo. Yeah, and if it is really silver, then they've been feeding on a lot of fish. But this idea of connection, the reward of having humpbacks come back from the brink of extinction, of having more of the great whales, They poo at the surface. And what that does is it fertilizes the phytoplankton who need the sun. What that does, it means that you have more productivity to fuel the entire food web so that there is more herring. What that means is when humpbacks go to the breeding grounds of Hawaii, Mexico, Central America, Japan, where there's little to no food, they still pee and they're actually leaving nitrogen behind in these areas that have less food in them. So the way that this is all fitting together, from herring to humpbacks, on, and oh boy, do we need this in a time where we're changing the climate. More phytoplankton, more buffering of carbon dioxide, and of course the whales are also carbon sinks themselves. Inukshuk also likes to sing. Be sure to follow us on social media. Inukshuk probably can be counted on to start singing even more in the fall, but they sing in these waters as well. Connection is important, but also the humility. After 40 years of studying humpbacks, no scientist yet has figured out why humpback males sing. Females make sound too, and of course, the main theory right from the start was going to be, oh, they're posturing to the females. Choose me, yeah, for being your baby's daddy. But it looks more likely that they're establishing acoustic territory as males. But I love that we haven't figured that out. And it emphasizes just the necessity for humility. The way that things are fit together, this is the image from this month's calendar that I put together every year. And these baby basket stars start off inside the coral for protection and then climb out on the outside. You can imagine how research like this, back in the time when we were more about curiosity, where there were naturalists, where things weren't fueled by their economic importance, that kind of research got funded, but so much of it doesn't now. The need for humility, if you follow us on social media, you know about this and you know how freaking amazing this is. So ocean sunfish, many British Columbians, yeah, coastal people who share our coast, are not aware that there are ocean sunfish for starters, or presume they are mola mola. I love more than I can express that there is a researcher in New Zealand who then saw a stranded mola in a San Diego newspaper and went, that's not a mola mola, that's a mola tecta. And sure enough, they look really, really different. I can tell them apart now. And mola tecta has only been described as a new species since 2017 in New Zealand. They were thought to only be there. And now we're collecting these sightings, helping collect these sightings, that they're found all the way up into Alaska. We know so little, and this begs the right humility. Nobody on earth knows how humpbacks find their food, or any other baleen whale. You can still get pictures of humpbacks that nobody's ever photographed before, to our knowledge, and you can have a giant, weird looking fish like this and mistake it, whereby it justifies the name the hoodwinker for having fooled we humans. But clearly, we weren't looking closely enough. We need precaution. So species at the surface, species on land, if something goes wrong with them, we're more likely to notice. But the curse of cold, dark seas is that so much of this life and fragility is hidden. The look on my buddy's face here shows you how awe-inspiring sunflower stars are. They are up to 1 meter across, and they are in terrible, terrible trouble, and so many people don't know. They have the same role in the ecosystem as do sea otters. If there were a bunch of dead sea otters at the surface, I know that you would support that. That would be different. People would put money into the research, save the sea otters, look at their cute little faces. Yeah, we have to put money into this. They're terribly important to the ecosystem, where this is happening below the surface. Sea star wasting syndrome has been raging since 2013. Some species of sea star have rebounded. Sunflower stars absolutely have not. There are so many people that talk about sea stars as if they were one species. That is not helpful. There are more than 30 species in our waters. Sea star wasting disease, the cause is not yet known. Believed to be a virus or bacteria, it causes the sea stars to contort. This is a video that has been sped up. They start shedding their arms. It's a natural response to stress. And they actually can regrow back from one arm as long as part of the central disc is there, but they never get a chance. They turn into these piles of decay. And I've watched this happening since 2013 and have been trying to speak for the sea stars. And thankfully now we're moving ahead with others where at least they will be looked at by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, where maybe they'll end up protected under the Species at Risk Act. But their importance, well, they, amongst the many things that they eat, they're significant predators of urchins. Urchins aren't bad guys, but if their predators are in lower numbers, be they sea otters or sunflower stars, this has also been sped up, they mow down the kelp. So then what you get is, instead of a kelp forest with all its habitat looking like this, with all its oxygen, food production, and buffering of carbon dioxide, you get this. And that's a problem, but it's hidden under the surface. It is believed that that is related to warming waters. It's not known what the pathogen is, whether it's a virus or a bacteria, but that the changing climate has something to do with it. Well, this isn't just about sea stars anymore and oxygen production and carbon dioxide buffering and habitat for fish. This is something that we need to learn from directly, as is the case with gray whales. So you'd think that we would know about these giants, that we would have it all figured out. But extraordinarily, what was thought to be one population of gray whales off our coast that thankfully was not wiped out by whaling, unlike the gray whales on the other side of Canada, are now understood and recommended to be recognized as 3 different populations. So where the thought was they all come up from Mexico and up they go to the Bering Sea, where now it's understood that a very small number of them go from Russia, come all the way down the Alaskan Panhandle and along our coast, that some of them stay on the outside of Vancouver Island, and then indeed that the largest number continue up to the Bering Sea. Currently, it is the 3rd year of an unusual mortality event. That's jargon from the US for, more are dying than what we normally see. And here's a picture then of an incredibly skinny gray whale that was seen up here off northeastern Vancouver Island, another one that ended up dead on the northwest side of Vancouver Island. What's going on? Well, it's difficult, again, even with our vast coastline, to figure out, if you can even find the bodies, what might be going on with them. But it does look like a lot of them are really skinny, and that the leading hypothesis is that with the changing climate, you have changing productivity in the Bering Sea, so that they're not able to bulk up enough. They still migrate, and when they come up, that they're running out of fuel. But this is incredibly important. And again, if we don't have the connection to the ocean, that we don't understand that it is the ocean that often testifies to environmental problems first, if we don't think of whales as individuals, we could be making decisions that don't benefit the survival of our own kind. But not wanting you to be sad, because there's a lot going on. There's an awful lot going on. And I too have to ensure I do not stay or slip into the pit of despair. How do you stay an educator? How do you make it count? How do you deal with the flood of negative messaging? It's by seeing the common solutions and understanding that if you slip into the pit of despair, you can't be part of the positivity to move things forward. And oh, have we moved forward. I see that some of you are in my age demographic. You know this. You know just how horrifically racist society used to be, how homophobic. Yeah, we used to be whalers. We used to chop basking sharks in half. I think it's so important to realize that we have this incredible capacity for change and to understand what causes it so we can help move it forward. This photo is so powerful to me. This little humpback whale died from an entanglement. It actually is believed to have outlasted the hooks that corroded off on the fishing gear around its head. So emaciated, washed up near Vancouver. And look at what this image suggests. Look at how quickly we've moved away from being whalers. There is reverence here. There is respect. There is connection. There is concern. There was a First Nations ceremony held for the whale. We do change really, really quickly. It is unthinkable now that with an endangered leatherback turtle, in fact, we didn't use jargon like endangered. Canada's Species at Risk Act has only been around since 2004. It would be unthinkable that somebody would kill as an anomaly, as a thing of interest, a leatherback turtle. But we still, so many British Columbians don't realize that our waters are so worthy of the amount of food they have in them that the leatherback turtles belong in our waters and that they come here all the way from Indonesia. Isn't this something we won't want our school children to understand? And this little video shows you then just how thick the waters are. And it also shows you that there are many ways to kill marine animals, not only by a changing climate, but through a society of disposables where we don't think of what happens to our plastics or as we release balloons into the atmosphere, and that those can then be mistaken for the food of the likes of leatherbacks. What a powerful, powerful engager to get people to care, to emphasize again this idea of capacity for change so people don't get stuck in the sludge of all these problems and perceiving them to be disparate. Is we used to even chop basking sharks in half. I keep on emphasizing this, but for me, it's the epitome of how we've changed, like how extreme it can be. Basking sharks don't even have teeth. Why on earth would we have chopped them in half? Yeah, we chopped them in half. We shot at them because they were an inconvenience because they got stuck in fishing nets because they basked at the surface. But what is so extraordinary to me is it was then a government boat that had a blade mounted on it, so a Coast Guard vessel, to then chop them in half. And the way this was put into the world is, yay, humans, you're so ingenious. In fact, in 1956, this was in the magazine Popular Mechanics, which celebrates human ingenuity. I assure you, there's no child that would allow, this to be happening to basking sharks. We have such capacity for change. And then indeed that in 1961, again, within the lifetime of some people on this call, our government put a machine gun at the middle of Vancouver Island for the purposes of executing killer whales. That is who we used to be. It was never fired. And what I've heard is it's both because fortuitously the whales moved on, as well as that somebody went, wait, maybe we shouldn't have ricocheting bullets over the surface of the water because there's people around. But this is who we were, that the government would appease fishermen with the perception that there are too many orca, they all eat the same thing, rather than understanding through the efforts of somebody who took the time to tell them apart as individuals, who against, even with great resistance, persisted with his research, where we know that there are different kinds of orca with different culture, with different language, who have such an incredibly important role within the ecosystem. So yeah, making clear how quickly we can change, let's do it through movie covers. So this was 1977, around the time of Jaws. The movie cover alone shows you, what this movie would have been like. And what I wish, this would have been when Dr. Michael Bigg, was still alive, and he would have been doing his research. And I would have loved to have watched this movie with him. Yeah, because it's the daddy and the female and the baby, and Bo Derek gets her leg bitten off, and all this stuff going on when he already knew there were different kinds of orca, and there certainly wasn't mommy, daddy, and baby going on. But if I'm trying to show how we've changed over time, I think you have a sense of what next movies would come up as showing our human social evolution. And that's right, folks, it's Free Willy, all of them. Yeah, they are a pretty good marker of, okay, that's really different than Orca, the killer whale. But I think you'd also agree that all of them were very much about humans at the center of it all. Yeah, as the saviors of wild animals, or not so wild animals. And then to make the point of how quickly we can change in just 36 years, folks, Blackfish. Yeah, where we have moved from vilifying the orca to making them into pets, to putting them into captivity, which has helped us understand them as individuals, but where we now know without a doubt that whales do not belong in captivity. Really, at the core of all of this, the capacity for change is when knowledge replaces fear. That's true for racism, it's true for sexism, it's true for how we perceive other animals. And these three dudes, we're a big part of it. And if we take the orca as such a powerful barometer of what our human values are. What I've learned as well is that it's incredibly important to speak for science, and if you can, with a sense of humor. But you may have noticed that science is in trouble these days. And I'm not just talking about funding, I'm talking about the people who say, do your own research, where everybody gets to have your own agenda. We live in a time where people talk about alternative facts. Yeah, what does that mean? So important in this all is to speak the truth, to speak to the limits of science, to speak for what is truly known and what is not. But in all of this, folks, and some of you have heard me say this before, because I think every presentation where I get a chance to talk about what I have learned, above all things to summarize, I believe it could be such a different world if we realized just 4 common solutions. Instead of this huge mess of problems in society, in the environment, often are of the same cause. What a different world it would be if we could frame things from a perspective of talking about solutions and realizing how connected we are. Choices made on land impacting sea, choices made on one side of the planet as a consumer impacting our neighbors on the other side of the planet. How important precaution is, but then truly in what it means, not let's continue on until we can figure out it's dangerous, but rather understanding, having the appropriate humility to realize how little we know and how devastating the consequences can be, and also to have an understanding of cumulative effects, which I think many people don't. Yeah, it's not just one threat to one species in one frame of time, it's the layering of threats and the same threat over greater time. Maybe the most valuable thing I've learned in the trenches of education is to frame using less, reducing, as something positive, not something negative. I have felt over the years when it's like, okay, how do you make things really, really different? Connection, precaution, but also use less dangerous chemicals, use less fossil fuels. Yeah, use less disposables, and the energy changes. Because now it's perceived as being, uh-oh, now I have to do something. I'd rather do this to other people. And we've been fed the idea that it's about loss. Being able to show the joy of living a life with using less could absolutely be a game changer. And then the huge thing is to realize just how empowered we are to affect change and why we're doing it for future generations through our consumer power and our voter power. But having said all of that, folks, with the major technical disaster, the biggest yet we've experienced in any presentation we've done, I'm going to leave 3 minutes to the life in these waters, to my neighbors, to speak to you, and then I'll answer your questions.
today you saw the face of God and love, would you change? Would you change? If you knew that love can't break your heart, when you're down so low you cannot fall, would you change? Would you change? How bad, how good does it need to get? How many losses, how much regret? What chain reaction would cause an effect? Makes you turn around, makes you try to explain, makes you forgive and forget, makes you change, makes you change. If you knew that you'd be alone, knowing right, being wrong, would you change? Would you change? If you knew that you would find a truth that brings a pain that can't be soothed, would you change? Would you change? How bad, how good does it need to get? How many losses, how much regret? What chain reaction would cause an effect? Makes you turn around, makes you try to explain, makes you forgive and forget,